Welcome to the second video from the City of St. Helens Finance Department. In this video, we will give a general overview of the city's budget. We'll take a look at the budget process, how the city is set up through the budget, some specific St. Helens budget items, and then we'll take a glance at the budget book to better understand how to best review it and understand it. So let's get started. Building a city budget is really no different than a normal monthly budget you do for your household. It's just on a way bigger scale. Whereas your household income, for example, may be $2,500 per month that you have budgeted for, and the City of St. Helens has a yearly budget of around $45 million. With any budget, there is money that comes in, which we call revenue, and then there are costs that go out. We call these expenses. Anything left over at the end of the year, often referred to as carryover, becomes the beginning balance for the next fiscal year. This is another term you will hear about during the budget process, fiscal year. We all know that January through December is a calendar year. Think of the fiscal year along the same lines for a city. For the City of St. Helens, our fiscal year runs from July through June every year. Just like at the end of the calendar year, you get a report on your taxes and you have to report them to Uncle Sam. The city does the same thing every year in the form of a yearly audit. This is done by a third-party company, and they review all the revenue and expenses throughout the fiscal year, and then prepare the yearly financial statements for the city. So let's not forget that our fiscal year runs through July through June every year. The city actually begins the yearly budget process around January. The finance director will usually start putting reports and numbers together about where the city is halfway through the year, and project where the city will be with revenue and expenses by the end of the year. In January, the City Council will approve someone, and usually the finance director or city administrator, to be a budget officer. This person is basically in charge of putting together a budget to present to the Budget Committee and City Council for approval. In February and March, staff is reviewing the current year projections and also begins discussions about what is needed in the next fiscal year. Each department presents their budget to the budget officer, and then it is the budget officer's job to put everything together and see if the city has enough money to cover everything. The budget officer, or city administrator, and department managers will talk about everything and eventually come to a conclusion on what to include and what to not include in the upcoming budget. Around April and May, the city will hold one or more public meetings with the Budget Committee. These are community members that have volunteered and are appointed by the City Council to help review the city budget and ensure that the budget is balanced and meets the goals that the City Council has identified. There is no minimum or maximum number of meetings that a city budget committee must hold, but there are specific requirements that we will get into on a later slide. At the end of the budget committee meetings, the budget committee will approve the proposed budget, and then it will be sent to the City Council for final adoption. In June typically is when the City Council will review and approve the budget and adopt it before the beginning of the next fiscal year, which is July 1st. The role of a budget committee member is pretty simple. They are there to review the budget that has been proposed by the budget officer. They have two main questions to ask and answer. Does the budget meet the goals of the City Council? And the second question, is the budget balanced? Let's take a look at the basic setup of the financials for the city and how they're organized. Think of these as building blocks, and each one builds on top of another. The first main building block is commonly referred to as a fund. As I discussed in the first video presentation, each fund has its own purpose. As an example, the street fund is intended to help fund street maintenance and improvements. The second building block is referred to as departments. Within each fund, there may be departments that help categorize revenue and expenses in more detail. As an example, we can look at the general fund, which usually has the most departments of any fund. Within the general fund is where you will find departments such as administration, police, library, recreation, and several other departments. The third building block, or categories, helps show transparency of revenue and expenses within each fund. Within most departments, you will see the following categories of expenses. Personnel services, which are people expenses, materials and services, these are operating expenses, debt service, which are loan payments, transfers, these are transfers out of a department, contingency, these are funds that are held without restriction but are not budgeted to spend. The last category of expenses you will see is unappropriated. These are funds that are set aside and cannot be spent within the fiscal year unless there is an emergency declaration. In many funds, you will see an unappropriated balance listed in every fund. Having funds listed here helps build the beginning fund balance for the next fiscal year. This graphic shows all of the different main funds that the city operates. Each fund has its own budget and must balance to zero every year, meaning that legally the city cannot have expenses that exceed revenue. In other words, the city cannot legally budget to go into the red. Now that we know each fund that operates, let's take a look at the departments within each fund. In the general fund is where you will find a majority of departments operate throughout the city: administration, city recorder, city council, court, police, library, finance, parks, recreation, planning, building, and general services. All of these departments share revenue within the general fund. In the Community Development Fund, you will find economic planning, industrial business park, riverfront, timber harvesting, and tourism. Under the Community Enhancement, you will find general, police, library, arts and cultural, housing assistance, and youth council. The Street Fund does not have any departments. Under the Enterprise Funds, all of the SDC funds have no departments, just like the Street Fund. The Water Fund has two separate departments, one for distribution and one for filtration. The Sewer Fund is broken out into four separate departments: collection, primary treatment, secondary treatment, and pump services. Collection maintains the collection lines and structures like manholes. Primary treatment consists of a 3-acre primary lagoon that treats all of the waste from the residents of St. Helens and Columbia City. Secondary treats waste from the primary lagoon after chlorination and waste directly from Cascades tissue. Pump services are the 9 sanitary lift stations that collect water from the surrounding area and pump the waste uphill to the collection system, where it then goes downhill to the treatment plant. The Storm Fund does not have any departments. Under the Internal Service Funds, the Equipment Fund and IT Services do not have any departments as well. The Public Works Operations Fund has 2 departments: Engineering and Public Works Operations. And finally, the Major Maintenance Fund does not have any departments. So that summarizes all of the departments within every fund that the City of St. Helens operates. As I mentioned earlier, the third building block are categories for revenues and expenses. These categories are set up by the state of Oregon, and you will see them used throughout the budget document. Under revenue, you will see these categories. Taxes is where we report property tax revenue and transient motel hotel tax revenue. Intergovernmental means any revenue that we receive from another government agency. These are usually things like grants or state revenue sharing disbursements. Everything else should be pretty self-explanatory. Under expenses, you will see the following categories. Personnel services is people, so things like salaries and benefits. Materials and services are all operating expenses. Capital outlay are expenses on purchases over $5,000. This is where you will see large purchases of equipment or construction projects that the city is looking to spend money on. Debt service are loan payments from debt that has been taken out for the past or future projects. Transfers are any transfers that are made to other funds. Contingency, as I mentioned earlier, is where the city can allocate funds to be used if necessary. This is a reserve of money set aside to cover unforeseen expenses in the fiscal year. Unappropriated is a category as a reserve of money set aside for future years. So this is money that cannot be spent without a declaration of emergency. So oftentimes when you see funds listed in this category, they are there because we are saving that money for next fiscal year. Depending on what organization you are looking at, each budget can be organized in different ways. For the City of St. Helens, our budgets are organized into 5 main areas that you will see outlined in the budget document. Those 5 areas are General City Information. Here you will find some basic demographic information about the city, possibly some history information and some other required information about budget process and organizational structure. Usually the most important part of this section is the actual budget message. The budget message is usually written by the budget officer and explains the year's budget and usually provides some great context about what is included and what is not included, and any kind of local or economic trends that the city has seen. The budget message is a great first place to start when reviewing the document because it will give you a condensed verbal explanation of what's going on this year that you should know about. The second section is a budget summary. Here you will find the most recent City Council goals that the budget relies on to help staff with direction and items to work towards. You will also find a 30,000-foot level summary of the financial information for all revenue and expenses. The third and largest section of the budget is the actual financial information for every fund. This is the actual budget portion of the budget document. It is organized by category of funds and provides the detailed information of revenue and expenses for every fund. The fourth section is the Capital Improvement Plan. This is also referred to as the CIP. This is a 5-year capital projects or purchases over the next 5 years. It is often used by our Public Works Department to ensure that we are planning for improvements and have capacity and funding for those projects as they come up. Projects that are listed in the Capital Improvement Plan usually come from master plan documents that have been created that outline improvements for growth, development, and maintenance of our city infrastructure. The final section of the budget document are the appendices. This is where you will find items like debt service repayment schedules, salary schedules, financial policies, and a glossary of generally defined terms. Now we can talk about what you will actually see when you look at each budget. Here are some general guidelines and explanations for what you're looking at. On the screen right now is a picture of the General Fund, General Services Department budget. First, you will see that the fund or department listed at the top of the page. It should include a short description of what the fund or department you are looking at, and also may include some statistical information that we track over the years. The header information is next, so let's work left from right. The first column is the category information. Like I talked about earlier in the presentation, you will see all the categories that apply. If revenue is shown, you will see categories like charges for services, property taxes, and others. For expenses, you will see categories like are shown here: personnel services, materials and services, and transfers, and any others that may apply. Also listed in this column are the actual account numbers for our financial system. These are included so that when staff is looking at the budget, they know what account numbers to use when they have to code a revenue or expense item that has to be entered into our financial system. And then lastly in this column are the account line descriptions. The next set of columns is the actual financial information. As you can see, there are 6 columns labeled in the header. The first 2 are actual historical numbers that have been audited. The next, labeled Adopted, is the current fiscal year adopted budget amount. For the upcoming budget year, you will see 3 different columns: Proposed, Approved, and Adopted. When the Budget Committee first reviews the documents, you will see numbers only in the Proposed column. That indicates that you, as a Budget Committee member, are reviewing only what has been proposed by the Budget Officer. Once the Budget Committee officially approves the budget, then the proposed columns get moved over and copied to the Approved column. Once the Budget Committee approves the budget, it then goes to the City Council for approval. When the City Council reviews the document, and the proposed and approved columns will be filled in. Then the final step of City Council is the approval. Once that is completed, the final budget document will have the adopted section filled in. Well, that pretty much wraps up this informational video. Again, here's a quick rundown of the timeline of events to approve the city's budget each year. I want to thank you again for watching this informational video, and please do not hesitate to reach out through phone, email, or in person if you have any questions regarding the city's budget process. I look forward to seeing you at the next Budget Committee meeting.